London, Buckingham Palace. Hundreds of tourists clicking their cameras, admiring the royal guardsman. He stands as if carved from stone, his flawless form gleaming in the sunlight. Nothing and no one can move him. But someone has decided to put it to the test. The crowd parted as a man stepped forward, tall, heavy-lidded, neck-tattooed. He's not a tourist. He's looking for spectacle. He's looking for a victim. There he is, the immobile goon, he smirks. I wonder if you push him, what will he do? His voice is loud, attracting attention. People back away. But he moves on, looming over the guardsman, deliberately bumping his shoulder. The guardsman doesn't react. And then there's a voice that's unrecognizable. Hey, buddy, he murmurs, low and threatening. The crowd gasps. It's Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. He stands back, arms crossed over his chest, eyes harder than granite. Are you serious? You're testing this guy's patience? He takes a step forward. Bad idea, bro, very bad idea. The crowd in front of Buckingham Palace froze. Something was wrong. Normally, there was an air of respectful admiration, with tourists taking videos, posing in front of the motionless guardsmen, marveling at their resilience. But today, the air was different, tense, heavy, like before a thunderstorm. Reason stood right in front of one of the guardsmen, a tall, gruff man with tattoos on his neck and a smug grin. He wasn't here for a tour. He was looking for something else. Look at him, he said loudly, so that everyone around him could hear. Standing there like a statue, just like in the movies. I wonder if he'd even make a noise if you pushed him. The crowd tensed up. Some pulled the kids by the arm, leading them away. Others pulled out their cell phones, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. But the royal guard remained immovable. He was trained, he knew. No matter how provoked he was, he had no right to react. The man hummed and stepped forward, standing so close that the guard could feel his breath. Come on, he muttered. Show me you're alive. Silence. That's what I thought, he smirked. Just a mannequin in a red uniform. But before he could say anything else, there was a voice. Low, heavy, like the sound of thunder. Hey, buddy. The crowd gasped. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson stood a little ways away, arms crossed over his chest. His gaze was as cold as steel. You must not be very smart to humiliate a royal guardsman in front of Buckingham Palace. His voice was calm but threatening. The man turned around, and recognition flashed in his eyes. Oh, look at that! He waved his hands theatrically. The Hollywood savior. What? Are you putting on a show? The Rock didn't move an inch. You know, I've met a lot of guys like you, he said. They all thought they were tough, until they met someone tougher. The bandit grimaced, but didn't back down. Instead, he turned to the guardsman again. What about you? Still going to remain silent? His fingers poked at the soldier's chest. Or have you been so trained that you can't even make a peep? The Rock stepped closer. You'd better back off, brother, before it's too late. But the man only grinned. And then he saw something. A silver medallion gleamed beneath the guardsman's high collar. Small, but clearly precious to its owner. The bandit's eyes flashed with predatory excitement. Oh, that's interesting. He lunged forward and yanked the chain from the guard's neck. The metal gleamed in the sunlight. And in that moment, everything changed. The Rock tensed. The guardsman froze, but his fingers on the hilt of his gun clenched a little harder. The crowd froze, holding its breath. The bandit smirked. So, statue, now what? The Rock took a step forward. Brother, his voice was calm, but there was a threat in it. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life. The crowd in front of Buckingham Palace fell into a tense silence. Some were recording on their phones, some were glancing around, but no one dared to intervene. Everyone realized that something was about to happen that went beyond the usual tourist spectacle. The bandit smirked, twirling the silver medallion of the guard in his fingers. Well, soldier, he said with a sneer, are you going to say something now? Or is your discipline more valuable than this iron? But the guardsman was silent. Only those who knew what people who had passed through the army were capable of noticed the subtle changes. Tense muscles, slightly hitched breathing, fingers clenched on the handle of the gun. Give back the medallion, came a voice. But not the guardsman's. Dwayne Johnson stepped forward. Now he was standing close to the bandit, towering over him. You don't get it, brother. The Rock shook his head slowly. You made a mistake. A huge one. But the bandit didn't back down. Really? You're going to threaten me? He smirked and looked around the crowd theatrically. You'll be locked up as soon as you touch me. Scala didn't move. Give it back. The man grinned and raised the medallion in front of Johnson's face. You want me to give it back? Well, take it back. He clenched the chain in his fist and defiantly raised it above his head. Last chance, the Rock said quietly but distinctly. The bandit's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer. Or what? A moment. A lightning-fast movement. And before he realized what was happening, his wrist was in a vice. An iron grip. Like a steel trap. The bandit twitched, but it was no use. The people around him screamed. Phones went up, recording every movement. Scala squeezed his hand a little harder. Does it hurt? He asked calmly. The bandit tried to pull free, but Scala didn't give him a chance. Instead, he pressed lightly, and the chain slipped out of the aggressor's palm, falling straight into the guardsman's open palm. The medallion returned to its owner. But it wasn't over yet. The bandit stared at Johnson with a wild mixture of fear and rage. Are you out of your mind? He wheezed, trying to yank his arm away. But Scala held it tight. Now, his voice was low, dangerous. You will apologize. The bandit grinned evilly. Why would I do that? Scala squeezed his wrist a little harder, forcing the man to duck slightly in pain. Because otherwise I'll show you how fear really feels. The crowd held its breath. Something new flashed across the bandit's face. The Rock looked him straight in the eye. You took a personal item from him. Now you're going to say sorry. Or I'll teach you respect. The bandit gritted his teeth. But he knew he had no choice. The crowd in front of Buckingham Palace was mesmerized by the spectacle. This was no longer an ordinary tourist incident. It had turned into a veritable duel of glances, where the stakes were far higher than just wounded pride. Scala didn't let go of the bandit's hand. His steel grip spoke louder than any words. It's not who shouts the loudest that rules here, but whoever is truly in control. Apologize, he repeated slowly, looking the man straight in the eye. Fuck you, the bandit lunged, trying to get away. The Rock didn't move. Then the bandit did what those who are accustomed to settling matters by brute force do. He tried to strike. His left hand swung toward Johnson's face. It all happened in an instant, but to the crowd, it was like a slow-motion movie. Suddenly, the blow missed its target. The Rock, without even changing his expression, had intercepted the bandit's other arm and was now holding him with both hands. That's it, he said quietly. You wanted this for yourself. The next moment he turned around, using the bandit's own strength against him. In one sharp movement, he pulled the man forward, then pushed him down. The bandit lost his balance. He collapsed to his knees, hitting the stone sidewalk of Buckingham Palace with a loud thud. The crowd gasped. Some even applauded. The man cried out in pain, his knees shuddering from the impact, but his eyes still blazed with anger. He tried to jump up, but then he heard a click. It was the sound of a rifle but hitting the ground lightly. The guardsman, who had remained motionless all this time, now made exactly one movement. He put his foot in a fighting stance and held his weapon at the ready position, not pointing it directly at the bandit, but showing that if necessary, he would be able to defend himself instantly. The bandit froze. His breath hitched. He looked up and saw more than just a guardsman. He saw a warrior, a man who was neither puppet nor target. Now everything had changed. Slowly, very slowly, he shifted his gaze back to the Rock, who was still towering over him like a mountain. The bandit said, coughing. I didn't. Don't make excuses, Johnson said firmly. Just say it. The bandit swallowed. The crowd froze in anticipation. The man gritted his teeth. And, clenching his fists, he wheezed. Okay. Excuse me. Who are you saying that to? Scala didn't even move. The bandit covered his eyes for a second, then slowly turned to the guard. I'm sorry, he said. The guardsman didn't say anything, just stared down at him in silence. Scala smiled. Well done, he nodded. Now get out of here before it gets worse. The bandit jumped up, rubbing his wrist. He gave the Rock a look of fury, but said nothing. He simply turned and stumbled away into the crowd. The crowd erupted in applause. But Scala only turned to the guardsman, looking at him with respect. You're one hell of a badass, brother, he said. The guardsman didn't answer, but something resembling appreciation gleamed in his eyes. The crowd around Buckingham Palace applauded, but tension was still in the air. Everyone thought it was the end. But they were wrong. The bandit staggered away into the depths of the crowd, holding his wrist. His face flamed with humiliation. Had embarrassed himself in front of hundreds of people. In front of the camera. In front of Dwayne Johnson himself. But people like him always have a plan B. It was only a few seconds later. And then someone yells out, He pulls out a knife. The rock instantly turned around. The bandit, who had been hiding among the people, suddenly rushed back. A blade flashed in his hand. The crowd screamed. People began to back away. But Dwayne was not the target. His eyes were filled with rage. He was charging straight at the royal guard. He wanted to get even, to hit someone who couldn't fight back. The guardsman didn't move. His whole life is training, stamina, self-control. But a knife is different. This is no longer provocation. It's an attack. The blade glinted in the sunlight. The bandit was one step away from striking. And then it all happened in a split second. A click. The muffled sound of a buttstock moving sharply downward. The guardsman made the only move he was entitled to. He knocked the hand with the knife away, hitting his wrist sharply with the butt of his rifle. The blade flew from the bandit's fingers and fell to the sidewalk with a clatter. But he did not stop. His other hand was caught by the rock. A lightning-fast grab. A tug. And in the next instant, the bandit was face down. The rock had him pinned to the ground. The crowd couldn't believe their eyes. A second ago, this man had been trying to attack an armed guard. Now he was lying on the cold rocks with two giants towering over him, one in a red uniform, the other in a black t-shirt, with a stone-faced expression. It all happened so fast that the guards were just running up to the scene. The guardsman froze again. His face was completely impassive, as if nothing had happened. Scala leaned over to the man, who gasped at his own defeat. You tried to attack a Kingsguard with a knife? His voice was low, slow. Dangerous. Are you really that stupid? The bandit was trembling. The guards rushed toward him, grabbing his arms and lifting him off the ground with force. The crowd was buzzing. The cameras were rolling. It was the end. But then the bandit did something no one expected. He raised his head, and instead of rage, there was something else in his eyes. Fear. Real, unbridled fear. He looked straight into the guardsman's face. His voice shook. I'm sorry. He didn't look at the rock. Not at the guards. Only at the man he had tried to wound a moment ago. The guard didn't answer. He only stepped back slowly, returning to his stance. As if nothing had happened. The bandit was being led away. But he didn't fight back. All he did was look back from time to time. This silent man. This man he would never forget.